Okay, we'll kick off. Welcome to this session. We'll be discussing how we can monitor our vCenter appliances through the REST APIs. First, a few words about myself. My name is Rudi Martinsen, and I'm working with Proact in Norway. I primarily work with automation and integration. And then primarily of the vSphere infrastructure. And I've also done a lot of work around infrastructure and performance monitoring over the last year. I am a vExpert and also part of the leadership of the VMware in Norway. So I have my Twitter handle there and also the blog. So please feel free to follow that if you want. So a short agenda for this talk. We'll discuss a bit about why we would like to or have the need for monitoring our vCenter appliance, and also why you might think of building something out yourself. Then we'll have a short introduction into the vSphere APIs and then exploring the REST APIs for vCenter. This will not be a in-depth or tutorial of REST APIs themselves, but just so how we can get to know them. And then finally, how we can build out some dashboards with the information we can pull from our vCenters. So please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer them when I see them or at the end. So with that, let's kick off. So this is the management interface, the VAMI of an vCenter. Hopefully, I guess most of you have seen this before. So the VAMI is getting better and better for every release, I think. It gives a lot of information about the health of the vCenter, and this front page has things like the version information, the health status, and so on. And there are different parts of it where you can go in and get even more information, which we'll take a look at soon. But what about other stuff than this front page? What about how can you know if the backup is running or that all the services are healthy or if there's any updates available? And what if you have 2 vCenters or 10 or even more? The ability to pull data and store them in a central place is also a huge use case for building out this yourself. And maybe also your vCenter is on a lockdown network and you're not able to reach it from your office network. So that's also one of the use cases of pulling data into a central location. So to do that, we'll use the APIs available. So first, a few pointers on the APIs themselves. So until recently, most of the APIs available for vSphere were SOAP-based. So SOAP is a protocol, like HTTP is a protocol, and also TCP, and so on. And to an infrastructure guy like me, I'm not from a developer background. The SOAP-based APIs are pretty cumbersome to use. But with that said, most of us use them on a day-to-day basis through the SDKs like PowerCLI, the Ruby package, Python package, etc. All of these are using the SOAP-based API. But in 6.5, we got a new RESTful API with vCenter. So REST is not a protocol; it's not even a standard. It's just a set of principles dictating how a REST API should look like and work. But as it's not a standard, there might be some differences between different REST APIs, but still it's much more easy to use, which we'll see. And the REST APIs are are extended now in 6.7 and also in 7. So it's the way forward. As for VMware, as for all of the rest of the industry, everyone is delivering REST APIs nowadays. But what's also important to know is that SOAP and REST will coexist for a long while. Some people say that the SOAP API will be there forever because it's so extensive. But some of the new stuff coming will probably only be available through REST. Okay, so how do we explore these APIs? Well, there are a lot of different ways of doing that. We'll check them out. First, we have the code.vmware.com site, which is a great starting point. We have a tool called Postman, which you might have heard of, where you can explore the APIs, and we will make use of what's called collections to see some examples. We have the API Explorer, which is running on your vCenter and talking directly to your environment. And then we have all the other CLI-based tools, of course, as well. So let's head into to a small demo. So this is the code.vmware.com site, which is a great resource. You have the sample exchange where people can upload their example codes, which you can download and take a look at. But we'll focus on the API Explorer for now. So, and this is kind of what you'll probably want to do for every API you work on, is to check out the documentation, read the manual, and we'll head over into the vSphere automation API here. As we see, it's not published anything for 7 yet, so hopefully that will come soon, but we have the 6.7 at least, which is what we'll look at. So this API has 5 parts to it. So we have the appliance part, the common infrastructure part, the content library, the VAPI, and the vCenter inventory, where you can find information about VMs, etc. We'll focus on the appliance parts today, and we have several things available to us here. So if we want to know more about the appliance health, we can go in and dig into these different endpoints. So for instance, the system health, click on the get operation, we see how we are supposed to build our request and what the response will look like. Also, this documentation has a section on related code samples, where we find at the top here this Postman resources and samples thing. And this is where you can download a bunch of collections which you can import into the Postman client. And there's a step-by-step guide on how you use or do that import. So I won't go through that, but I have already imported these 2 collections in my Postman client. And we see we have a lot of examples here which we can use. So the first thing we need to do is to log in, and I'm logging into my vCenter. So the Postman tool has this concept of environments, where you can specify details for your environment. So the vCenter server, the username, password. Of course, please do not put your production details in here, but this is a lab, so I'm fine with that. And Postman will now, in these variables, put in my details instead. So I could do this against different environments. So both the vCenter server and here the username, password. So I only need to click send over here. I get this session ID back, which is kind of what I'll use to authenticate each and every subsequent API call now. Postman takes care of this for me. So I can, if I want to check out the system health, which we saw in the documentation some seconds ago, I can click send here, and I get an immediate response back. So my system seems okay. So we also have, as I said, the API Explorer running on your vCenter. So this is my lab vCenter. I can click on this vSphere REST API link and get this API Explorer. So we see again, there's these 5 different parts of the API. I select the appliance and I need to log in. And I can now run stuff directly from this API Explorer. So again, with the system health, with some examples and some documentation, I can hit try it out, and this goes directly to my vCenter and pulls out information. So again, I see that we have the value green. So another nice feature about this API Explorer is this curl part, where I can copy paste this string into a terminal. Just click and add in the K for certificate checks, and I have again the response back. So lots of ways of discovering this API. The last thing I'll show is from the UI directly. I'm now again logged into my vCenter. I have from the this home page or the menu and developer center, the API Explorer. Again, we see the 5 different parts. I'll hit appliance, and since I'm now already logged in, I can go to my health system and click execute and get the same response back. So multiple ways of checking out the APIs. Okay, so going back to the presentation, now let's try to make use of this data and build out some dashboards. So what I've previously done is I've built my own performance monitoring solution with performance stats from VMs and hosts, which I pull with PowerCLI. I store them in a time series database, InfluxDB, and then visualizing it in Grafana. So both Influx and Grafana are open source tools, very easy to get started with. It installs and configures in minutes, and you can very quickly get up and running with this. So when I build out this myself, I can also add in other parts of my infrastructure, like for instance a storage array to the same database, visualizing it in the same tool. So I can correlate things across my infrastructure with different components. So I'll try to add the vCenter stuff into that same database. So I have only one UI to work with. So again, going back to the VAMI, this is kind of what we'll try to replicate, some of the functionality in here. So we'll quickly head back to my environment. And now instead of here, let's head into the VAMI first. So I'll log in here. So now we're in the live environment. So we have some version information, which could be nice to pull. We have the health status, which is more interesting. We also have this monitor section where we have CPU memory utilization. We have the different storage partitions and the utilization on them. Some network metrics and also the database utilization. We have the services. So again, with different parts here, we have the health of the service and also the running state, which is also vital information. We have the update section, which could be interesting to pull, and finally also the backup. So for instance, if the backup schedule is enabled or not, we have the different backup jobs, the duration, etc. So let's try to pull this part first. And to do that, first I need to head over to my Influx server. So I'll quickly log into that. Oh, sorry. So InfluxDB is, as I said, I'm just double checking that it's running. Yeah. So InfluxDB, an open source database, time series database, which is very easy to get started with. It installs in as I said earlier, in minutes, and the default configuration is more than enough for a demo or POC. So I'll log in, and I'm listing the databases. So as you can see, I already have a VCSA database. This is kind of it's pulling data from my lab environment regularly. But for this demo, I'll create a fresh database to bring in the proper syntax, like that. So in Influx, things are stored in measurements. So we can refer to this as SQL tables if you're more familiar with relational databases. But since Influx is a NoSQL database, it's also schemaless. So we do not have to create anything more now to be able to put things into it. So it's just that database construct that needs to be created. So if I now want to insert some data, I'll simply use the insert keyword and then specify the name of the measurement or the table, if you will. So I'll call it my table. Then provide some tags if you want. So I could say tag 1 equals to my name. I could have a tag called server, which can be my server, and then a value, which could be a numeric. I could have some text, etc. And then hit enter. Now, if I do a new show measurements, I see I have created a measurement or a table, and I can use my favorite, select star from, and I have my data. So in Influx, things the records are stored with a timestamp, which is kind of the key here. It's a time series database, so the time is actually on a nanosecond format, which is the default. You could also use milliseconds or seconds if you want to, but it's the nanosecond which is the default. Okay, so with this setup, let's try to pull data from the vCenter. So to do that, I have created some scripts. So we'll start with this first appliance info script, which we'll take a look at. First off, I'm defining some environmental parameters. So the name of the vCenter, the username, password. Of course, in a production environment, you wouldn't enter your password in clear text, but again, this is a demo. I specified the database I just created in the Influx server, and then I'm starting to building out my API stuff. So the first part here is how we authenticate to vCenter, and these lines are actually what both Postman and the APIExpert do for us in the background when we are authenticating. So it creates a base64 encoded version of my username and the password. So be aware of that this is a encoded version of it. It's not encrypted, so it's pretty easy to decode and get the password out in clear text if so wanted. I'll run this and I get this session ID back, which we saw briefly in Postman. And this we need to use this one in the subsequent API calls now. And that's what this session header is for. So I'll create an array for storing the data I'm pulling. I'm defining a timestamp in the nanosecond format, and I'm defining two API endpoints. So an endpoint looks like this. So we have the, hopefully you can see this. So the vCenter server name /rest/appliance/system and /version. So two endpoints here calls for two API requests. So we'll run those quickly. As you can see, they are very, very fast. And I have gotten some response back. So let's take a look at this first one. So this should be the version information. So I get out the install time, I get the build number and the version. So this is things I would like to pull into my InfluxDB, and also the uptime, which is given in seconds. And finally, I'm building out this Influx syntax with the measurement name or the table name, then the tags. So one tag in this example, the vCenter server name, and then the values. So version, build, and uptime. And then I'm using the Influx API to post this data. And again, that's also very, very quick. So I can go back into Influx and do a new show measurements. I see I have now a new table, the appliance info, so I can verify that. Sorry, information is here. So I have the build number, my tag, the uptime, and the version. So let's head over to Grafana to see if we can make use of the data over there. So I'm now in the Grafana where I have just a sample dashboard with vSphere performance data. So in this same place, I'll add in the new demo data. I already have a data source set up for it. So the data source in Grafana is kind of the link from Grafana to Influx, to the Influx database, specifying the server name and then the database name. So I'll see that it is working. Now I can go out and create a new dashboard. So I'll select my data source, and I see I have my two measurements or tables here. So selecting the appliance info, I should get the three values I pulled. So let's use the version first. And then I'll remove this quickly. Probably a graph is not the best way to visualize a version information. So I'll select the stat panel instead, like that. And I see I have now my version number here. And I can finally put in a title for this, like that. So that was the first value I'd pull. Now I'm just duplicating this panel, selecting the build. And I'll just add in a little trick for this. Stat panel is actually in beta, so it's some quirks still. You see the beta over here, but now I have the build number. And then finally, I can add in the uptime, which I pulled. So select the uptime. This gives the values in seconds. But in Grafana, you can specify the unit of the data you pull. So if I say that this is a second unit, Grafana will calculate this into a more human-friendly format, so 2 days. So in just a matter of minutes, or not say seconds, I have now pulled out some data from my actual vCenter and started to build out a dashboard. So pretty easy. Going back to my scripts, I can use this health script to pull this this data, the health status section. So one thing to note here is that the UI says a green check mark and good, and we as human can read that as okay, everything is okay. But the API will also give you this as a textual response. So again, we as humans can understand that green is probably okay, but to be able to use that such a status in Grafana, later on I'm doing a little mapping, which we'll soon see. But to this health script, again, it's built in the same way as the previous one, authenticating. Here are the different parts of the different endpoints I'll pull data from, and the Apple management, database storage, etc. We see the system endpoint, which we used as an example previously. I'm using the system last check timestamp as the timestamp for all of the records, so I'm pulling that as well. So actually in this script, I'm pulling 10 different API endpoints, so 10 different API calls. But we'll see that it runs in just a second. So, and then iterating through all of the endpoints, pulling out data. And here is that numeric mapping I spoke about. So I'm mapping the textual value of green into 0, orange to 1, red to 2, etc. And then finally building out the influx syntax as we saw in the previous script. So let me just run this one again. You see, it takes only a second for those 10 API calls, or 11 if you add in the influx one. Let's see in influx, we have now more measurements available to us. We can do a select star from health Apple management and see that we have the data from that one as well. So I have now both the textual value of green and then the numeric value, which I have put in myself. So let's head over to Grafana and see if we can make use of that. I'll duplicate this, and you see also that working with the Grafana UI is very easy. We can rearrange as we see fit. Now we have more measurements available to us. I can select this Apple management, and then I could select the text if I wanted to. But here comes the reason why I'm doing the numeric value mapping. If I wanted to reflect the status in the coloring, this takes only numeric values. So I cannot, it won't take green or red or whatever. So we need to give it a numeric value. So that's why I'm doing the numeric value. This is not seconds anymore. So I could say that if it turns 1, that means orange. And if it turns 2, then it's red. So the only drawback to this is that I need to re-engineer this value mapping to text if I wanted to. But in here you can actually just say whatever you want. You could say instead of red, we could use error. Instead of green, we could say okay, for instance. This is up to you. And then finally give it the correct title. Like that. So we could duplicate this, select a another health box. So system in this example, give it the correct title. And now we could also start experimenting with some other features in Grafana. We could say that we want to color the background instead of the text. And we could also, instead of having the OK text in here, we could remove that and maybe have in, when it's green, we know it's OK. So let's try a different layout. So we could do something like this. So we have the name of the metric instead, maybe. So this is all up to you how you want to visualize your environment. We could do a center, and if we remove this timing stuff, we get only the metric name. So this is kind of one of my hopes with this session, is that you can experiment with your data yourself and build out the dashboard that fits your environment. I will make the dashboards we see here available on GitHub, but again, hopefully you get some ideas here and you can build out something by yourself. Okay, so that was these boxes. I do have a few other scripts which we can briefly look at. We have the monitoring script, again built on the same structure, now using two other metrics, so CPU and memory utilization, using the appliance monitoring endpoint, and then pulling those stats. You will see that this script is actually using the same endpoint as this storage utilization script, but the difference is the interval I pull stuff on, and that's also, besides being a demonstration, that's why I've split the scripts up in smaller parts. So because pulling storage information or update information, backup information is maybe not that critical. So you could pull that on say a daily basis, but CPU utilization, health services, etc., you want to pull that more often. So we see that the storage script is going on a 30-minute interval, for instance. So instead of building out all of these boxes, we can take a look at a pre-built dashboard. This is a finished dashboard for my lab environment. So again, with some information at the top here, the version number, CPU memory utilization, uptime, etc. We have the health boxes, the services. I've just selected a few in this example. We have the storage utilization, and that more of a trend utilization on CPU memory and database storage, and then the updates available, and also here at the bottom the backup. The backup schedule is set to true, the state, the duration of the backup, etc. So all of this in one dashboard. And the beauty now is that I could actually select a different vCenter running in my lab, actually a vSphere 7, vCenter version 7, using the exact same API calls as done in the 6.7. So yeah. Going back to this one, let's also see a nice feature now. If we go into the VAMI page here and forcefully stop one of the services. So this is the vSphere client. Let me stop that one. That should mean that I get a 503 here in my vCenter. So this is, I'm pulling data on a 5-minute interval, so I have to just forcefully retrieve this data now. I don't think we have 5 minutes to wait for the status to change, so I'll just run this script pulling the services. And I see my UI is now degraded in this dashboard. So we can quickly see that something is wrong. Again, this is to give you some ideas on how to use the data. And this is for showing it in a dashboard, but you could also, of course, use the same principles in feeding a more of a monitoring solution where you can create alerting, etc. So there are some alerting in Grafana. I have set up alerting on Grafana, feeding my private Slack channel, but Grafana is more of a visualizing tool than an alerting tool. But again, the same principles can be used for both monitoring and visualizing. Okay, so looking at the time, we have some time left. So this was one way of displaying things. Let me head over to a different environment, which has even more vCenters. Just refreshing to see that this is actually still running. Yeah. So maybe not the most exciting dashboard, but again, we have 5 different vCenters running here. We have, I'm using a tool, the repeating feature in Grafana, which mean that I can have one of these roles per vCenter available in this list. So I've built this out one time, and then the repeating feature will give me one row per vCenter. So an easy way to display information for multiple vCenters. We could go and take a look at the health for this, and we see we have now CPU memory utilization. We have these load boxes as we saw in the previous example, some services, and we have that for multiple vCenters in the same UI. So it's easier to track things across a larger environment. Another layout might be a bit small, this text, but if one of these services would be stopped, then we would very quickly pinpointing one of the vCenters having a problem, for instance. So again, what I want from this talk is to show you how you can start experimenting with your data and how you can work with your data to really build something that fits your environment. I will, as I said, make both the scripts and the dashboards available. But I hope you can use them to experiment with your data and build out the dashboard fitting your environment and your needs. So with that, I think we could say thank you. I have this QR code that points to my blog. I have a section there on vSphere performance where I've just listed all of the different blogs I have done around this topic, going back a few years. So please feel free to check that one out. Contact me if you have any questions. I do not see any questions in the Q&A. There might be something in the chat. Yeah, so thanks, Dan. If there is any questions, feel free to come with them and I'll try to answer them.